Hello, good day or good evening wherever you are, good night even. My name is Chloe Bruce. I'm a former natural gas journalist, a business journalist also, and a former academic specialising in Russian politics and the political and economic life of the former Soviet Union. I'm a Russian speaker because I started to study Russian at the age of 14 at school. I had this good luck that they had Russian lessons then at this school, and I then went on to do a degree in Russian studies, won a scholarship to the London School of Economics to study the Russian government, but also the political economy of the transition states as they were back then. And then I went on to work as a journalist, and I was promoted to editor at the age of 24. And then I continued. I worked also for the Economist Intelligence Unit as an editor, and I was also a reporter writing also. And then I went on, after I became ill, which I'll describe in a moment, I went on to do a doctoral thesis on Russian energy politics, and I dropped out owing to ill health just after submitting my PhD or my doctorate studies there, as it's called, where I was studying at the University of Vienna under a scholarship also, full scholarship there also. I've discussed in these YouTube channels the parlous state of the British economy and social life in the context of how I was diagnosed with schizophrenia in my late 20s, about a good 20, even over 20 years ago. And all the stigma and how difficult it was to work, weighed down by the medications. And then subsequently I was diagnosed with epilepsy. And I've tried to describe how these co-occurring additions really have to be first and foremost. At the end of the day, that's the life-threatening condition, to have epilepsy, the risk of brain damage overnight in 1 second, and fitting. And or at least take 1 second and then renting a fit that could possibly cause death or brain damage, permanent brain damage. I've described an accident I had in Vienna when a building collapsed on me. I had a concussion, but luckily not an overly serious concussion, and a broken scapula. Part of my shoulder broke. And I've described how I kept working until I was finally written off amidst a lot of stigma and pain. It was about 2009, and I've been in hospital 4 times, twice psychiatric hospital, twice under section, and then the other time I've been in hospital is after my accident when I broke my shoulder and had the concussion. I've described the pain of psychiatric torture and stigma and libelous notes and racism in medicine in the UK at least. And as I said, this is all in the context of my special area, the war in Ukraine and now Russia, or it was always a bit in Russia if you think about the time of drone strikes in Russia, in Moscow even, and now it's escalated, that part, with the invasion into Russia by Ukraine, into Russian territory, and counter-invasion. And I've been talking about this in the context of fascist elements in London, in the United Kingdom, and how we have to sort out and strengthen our own democratic world, our own democratic structures before we criticise other countries. Otherwise, we can't really put in a very strong diplomatic effort. And I've also mentioned how I worked briefly in Vienna at the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. I was a local secondment to the Foreign and Commonwealth, the United Kingdom Foreign and Commonwealth Office. I had a role there, very briefly, a small role, and I was invited back, and I really enjoyed the work there in this diplomatic environment, but unfortunately I was having up to 100 myclonic seizures a night. And oh, there's a rainbow over there, I've just seen a rainbow. I wish I could turn my camera around to show you. It's a half rainbow. I can't see. Oh, I can see the other end. Just a sec. Oh, I'm not sure. I don't want to stand up and knock the table and to try and see the other end. I think it's a complete rainbow over Wandsworth in London, which is where I live. Anyway, so yes, it's been raining and sunny spells here. Yes, on the subject of weather, as you can see from the title of this this essay, this video, it is something extremely difficult to describe. There are nearly no words, and I called it the Munchausen Ministry and the Munchausen media here in the United Kingdom, for they sacrifice economic good sense in the reporting, genuine societal issues, accuracy in the report of housing and benefits, for the sake of a bizarre overkill on medical coverages. And some of them just go on and on about the odd charity with and they have a lack, in my view, of genuine experts being interviewed. I'm not denigrating the great experts that have been interviewed on some of these United Kingdom media channels. I just should like to say there's more need for expertise. And when the BBC, when I was doing my doctoral studies, the BBC, for example, invited me And, you know, I popped in to ask if I could get a job there. I'd been working as a journalist for a while and was an editor, and they said that they wouldn't pay me. And then later, when I was doing my, so this is before my doctorate, and then during my doctoral thesis, they rang me up to find out my conclusions before I'd completed it. And there was no money, nothing in it for me. And as such, I don't really feel that, I don't know the terms and conditions of other experts speaking on the subject. But I've chosen instead, for reasons you'll see in my first video, to be more outspoken on social media, on this particular video platform, because of a horrific, disastrous consequence of the BBC filming me in a psychiatric hospital under section, and then sort of lying and saying I consented quite openly in the documentary. That's hardly anything to write home about. I'm still trying to get them to stop doing this and to admit their errors. So today I've been talking then about the Munchausen media and the Munchausen Ministry, and as a victim of this Munchausen media, talking much rubbish about mental health and saying that we're violent and slap staff and stuff like that, with me juxtaposed with this, you know, ouch, 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 a patient just hit me. I didn't see anyone hitting the nurse. I've seen them hitting one another. I've been attacked by patients, but on the whole they didn't attack the nurses, and they may have attacked the doctors, but they were alone in the room with them. I personally haven't attacked a doctor or a nurse. And so today I want to talk about the most recent coverage of probably one of the most hot topics on in the media, which is the debates and our vote on whether to keep the winter fuel allowance for the elderly, which has been a part of the United Kingdom economy for a while, but I don't know if it's been a permanent fixture. It may have been on and off anyway, I just don't know. But anyway, people were depending on it, especially as prices of bills now are very high in the wake of the pandemic and the war in Ukraine and Russia. And this is difficult because the reason I call it the Munchausen Ministry, also I've said they over-focus on the nitty-gritty of sort of paying the NHS, but they don't really sort out the inefficiencies that I've highlighted. And you'll see here. So I'll read my quite short essay on the subject. At the same time, the UK government officials, and sometimes from both leading parties, propose to put more money, yet more money, from the public into the National Health Service, whilst cutting the winter fuel allowance. In other words, they go on and on about how we have to fund the NHS, an unwieldy dinosaur of healthcare that doesn't work and that is unsatisfactory by all accounts. We've now got the latest scandal of the Essex psychiatric units, which I know quite well. I used to live near that area in East London, and I know a doctor who was involved in a prison, a psychiatric doctor who was involved in a prison there, and I can say the standards, I can't even talk about how bad the patients are going to be if you know this doctor. And they're talking about funding yet more without addressing the issue of all these road staff that are costing a fortune, and yet at the same time they're cutting now. They've made a decision to take away the winter fuel allowance from pensioners, from the elderly. But also I should point out that some people like me on benefits have also not got, I personally haven't seen a cold weather payment that used to be part of the benefits package for a long while now. But if I'd known it was going to cost the elderly their fuel allowance, I would have happily never have had a cold weather payment. I'd have sacrificed that cold weather payment for the elderly. You know. And yet they say the NHS needs more and more funding, this great big dinosaur that I've described that doesn't work. I've repeatedly, in fact, said expressed in these videos on this channel, the sheer waste of money in NHS services. For example, nurses, who are hardly the picture of health themselves, talk about food habits. With those who have a healthy weight, I had to hear them drone on and on with one question after the other. Where do you shop? Sainsbury's? It was just horrific. On NHS money, when I was a healthy weight, a perfectly healthy weight, and doing exercise, all the right things, and also spending money on bizarre social services with no qualifications, and occupational therapists, utterly useless services, who sort of dance around, ooh, and they sort of make out we're the mad ones. They sort of have to dance, you know. It was just bizarre having to watch them dance. And dangerous benefits advice that nearly left me bankrupt at one point from non-experts. And this is what the money's going to, and yet they're going to take the fuel payment. And I don't know how to calculate the cost of fear, but if someone feels themselves in a panic about cold or gently becoming cold, then there's going to be a lot of fear, and that's hardly going to be good for the sums involved for the NHS. If the government had acknowledged the problem with the inefficiency in the NHS and chipped away at these NHS inefficiencies and targeted money towards genuine conditions such as epilepsy and with proper EEG recordings, with proper EEG management, with proper neurology departments, and clamped down on the misprescribing of medications. And in my case, because I'm seizure prone, I had a major grand mal seizure because of misprescription of medications. Then the A&E, the accident emergency departments, would not look the way they currently do, as they at least are described in the press. And then the structure of winter fuel payments may have been transparent and a welcome bonus for the elderly still. I watched some of the debate before the vote in the Parliament on television, and I was horrified to hear this is this Munchausen Ministry that I've been talking about and trying to get through to people about. What I heard was medical descriptions, graphic descriptions of death, the death of the elderly, not from one person but from more than one person, rather than solid economic arguments, trying to work out what to do economically. Instead we have graphic details of how they're going to die, or I can't even think about it, as they alluded to sort of various terrified constituents. What I mean is, can you please talk numbers, percentages, where the money is going from? Can we please hear about economics in terms of numbers, not emotions? And less of the hallelujah, rain amen. I refer to Labour Deputy Prime Minister Angela Raynor's shallow effort at describing housing policies amidst the viral video, they call it that in the press, of her dancing in Spain. There's a limit to how long they can get away with being just the newcomers on the political scene. They've been in long enough now to have made their own decisions instead of looking back at Conservative parties, other people, and saying they're to blame. And even in the context of the Grenfell Tower inquiry that blamed subsequent governments, and not just the Tory government, nevertheless, they didn't actually want to talk, at least Angela Raynor was talking about the Conservative Party yet again. We'll see what happens. They can't be the newcomer forever. They could discuss, for example, the technicalities that create a very high heating bill, rather than dishing out heating pills. What's a way of treating a heating disorder? What's a way of treating that? You have to talk numbers. You can't just say they're going to die. You have to specify vast numbers of intricate numbers. You can't just say the Tories' economic policies were to blame. You've been in office long enough. They're heating pills, this sort of medical part of the fuel allowance debate. They've often cited a black hole in the budget, but I prefer to call it a black void full of careless comments and little genuine information within it. I have said how I cannot cope with nurses going on and on about food or drink, knowing the money can be spent elsewhere, and I knowing the money could well be spent elsewhere. Most people do that economic equation, especially as they, at least in my case, have caused, in my case, I have now got food OCD and OCD about trespassing in my building. The media, who I've called Munchausen media, has also felt that economics in favour of medicine or obsession with Putin's wealth was either one or the other. I'm left completely baffled, for example, with this discussion of Putin's wealth, when we really have to be trying to find out how we can work through this terrible war and try to find a diplomatic solution, even if it ends up being between those two partners. At the very least, can we stop going on about Putin's wealth and talk about the pragmatics of what has happened there in every sense of the word to actually cause this? Instead, they go on about all these palaces, for example, when it seems to be a stigma of Russian architecture and culture. Russian presidents have various grand buildings to occupy. If you think about it, we have the White House, but we also have maybe other sort of grand residences for presidents. Just because the Kremlin has an elaborate architecture and is a bit more fancy than Downing Street, it doesn't mean it's sort of uber. Many countries with a presidential system, even if, unlike Russia, it's only a ceremonial president, have palatial properties with an inexact equivalent, but and with maybe being a sort of inexact, but nevertheless a sort of equivalent with Buckingham Palace, and similar to anti-royalists, some in their respective countries may indeed be against the opulence and wealth seen in a leader. I still don't understand how Putin has this property in Finland. How is he meant to go over the border into Finland and visit this property? How could you think about all the security and passes he would need? Are you aware that I'm just baffled? Are you aware that most people are not going to to just watch people die of cold and hunger this winter? I cannot bear it. Can you not at least talk about how you direct emergency shelter that does have heating, or would it be more costly than actually paying the winter fuel allowance? How can it happen? You can't just say it's going to happen. It cannot happen. You've got to start thinking of how to stop it happening. I suggest the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, who I've said in previous videos, are sort of weakonomics. They never add up to anything. Nothing substantial, nothing that will really help, nothing that's really giving a long perspective on things, nothing that really helps the diplomatic effort to stop the war in Central Asia and Ukraine. That it's their lack of vision. As I say, they can't be newcomers forever. It is their lack of vision and ability, their inability, that has caused this. I'm sure of this. And I'm not prepared to see a single person suffering when it is simply not their fault that this has happened. It cannot happen. You can't just sit there and say X number of people are going to die. That cannot happen. I'm one person saying this. I don't know what to do, except I think what I do in that situation, I know the church has a vicarage that you could go to that would be warm enough, and they have hot meals and things like that. If someone's frightened that day, I know for me that would be what I do. I go to the Christian church as best I can, but I haven't personally had to go there for cold or a hot meal. But if something frightens me, I can think, well, I could go to someone I trust in the church, and I know that they have hot meals sometimes, and the vicarage is there for people. It can be difficult to locate the local vicarage, but I know where my local vicarages are, and there's more than one. It's a place to go if you are suddenly frightened that you're going to perish because of the cold that day. That's all I can think of. Is there anyone out there with vision, say volunteers for installing efficiency measures? There are lots of new innovations for making a property more efficient when it comes to containing heat. Could they help with this or something like that before winter sets in? If I could, I would. I just don't have the ability to bring around insulation or anything like that. All I can think of is the church, and I donate to the church as best I can, and I know the vicarage is there to welcome people. Excuse me. But they have the imagination to understand the situation that people are in. Anyway, before I continue coughing, excuse me, that's the end of this particular discussion. Food for thought. As I say, all I can think of is the church as a place, and maybe to tell them how frightened you are this winter, which is what I would do if I was, I don't put the heating on at all. And of course I call this a heating disorder of the governments, because they're sort of the ones who have left this whole heating or eating debate gone too long without action. And admittedly it started, I believe, under the last government, but they could have been planning all this time how they're going to cope with that particular problem. And at the end of the day, if the fuel prices are high, the root causes have to be explained transparently and openly why this has happened. And to actually say at the end of the day it was European sanctions on Russia that made the gas prices high, because it was they who wanted the cessation of a pipeline that would go into Western Europe from Russia, a subsea pipeline. And that's meant to make us happy, is that we have high gas prices, but there were sanctions that you might have said that would affect Britain and our prices. And admittedly, it's a pandemic also. I don't want to be simplistic, but at the end of the day, Russia was our largest natural gas supplier and is used for electricity also. And it's nearly our only natural gas supply if you're not Britain in the European area. Norway has some, but they literally don't have the kind of volumes to export to the European Union. And that's food for thought. Are you going to keep moaning about his gas or something like that? Or are you going to say maybe pragmatism at the end of the day would have been better, especially as sanctions are provably very hard to bring into effect as anything positive when it comes to stopping conflict? Thank you for listening today. I'm wishing you all the best. You'll make it, and it cannot happen. Please, people, just know whatever we can do, we can try and do it. it doesn't bear thinking about. And what we didn't need is the government dabbling in medicine when a doctor would be perfectly well equipped to say and to the government what they face in the cold. And we also think of the Ukrainian troops and Russian civilians who have had to battle in cold, icy conditions and in other wars. Thank you.